Hello. I've just fought or refought the Battle of the Crimisus River using the Lost Battles rules by Professor Phil Sabin, and I thought I'd just give a little report on the major events of the refight. So, as the background to the battle, it occurred in 341 BC or 339, depending on whose dating you follow, and the forces involved were the Syracusans under the Corinthian adventurer Timoleon, and the Carthaginians under Hamilcar and Hasdrubal. So before the battle had occurred, Timoleon, who had taken over as kind of sort of tyrant of Syracuse, but not in so many words, had a disaffected army. His mercenaries had been without pay for quite some time, and he'd sent something like 1,000 troops who were extremely disaffected into Carthaginian territory to plunder and get a few bob to make them happy. And anyway, the Carthaginians were not happy about that at all, as you can imagine, and a force was sent out to deal with Timoleon. So something like 70,000 Carthaginians are reputed to have been involved, but that's likely to be a fantastic figure. But I mean, we never know for certain, but that seems pretty high. But the Timoleon was heavily outnumbered anyway, and with his less than enthusiastic mercenaries, he had to win a victory pretty quickly. So what happened was the Carthaginians were caught, fortuitously for Timoleon, crossing the Crimisus River. And Timoleon had come from this side, and cresting the hill saw the Carthaginians' advance guard was across the river, and decided to attack before the Carthaginian forces were all on the field. So the battle started off with most of the Carthaginians off the field here. In Lost Battles, they began with 4 units of chariotry on table, plus all of the Syracusan units. So the Syracusans had a smaller army and qualitatively inferior army in terms of overall fighting value, but individually the units were actually better as a whole, or better on average than the Carthaginian opponents, who tended to be levy units, as you can see by the larger size, compared to average units here. So the battle started off with Timoleon charging in his advance guard against the Carthaginian chariotry and not doing a lot of damage. And the Carthaginians, while this was happening, were hurriedly trying to get their forces on table across the river. They succeeded in doing so and took up the middle 3 zones here. So in Lost Battles, the battlefield is divided into zones, as you can see, which roughly correspond to the carpet tiles here. So it took some time for both sides to get their forces into the front line because of command problems and a bit of rain, which prevented effective deployment. And so that was delayed. It took about 4 turns for them to be fully engaged, but once that happened, there was attrition on both sides. The Carthaginians had superior numbers, but because their forces tended to be levies, they were able to be hit a bit more easily than the Syracusans. But it came down to a situation where both sides were sort of 1 or 2 hits away from being shattered, and a shattered unit causes a morale check for the whole zone, well, for the whole army, and units within the same zone are particularly vulnerable to routing. So it was a race to get the first few shatters and try and force the army to rout entirely. Now, the Carthaginians had one advantage in this, and that was this unit of cavalry here. Now, they came on later. They plonked down on this side and just worked their way around the flank, and eventually defeated their opposite numbers and moved in to the rear of the Timoleon's army and threatened to attack from behind, which put them, this zone in particular, in a pretty precarious position, both in terms of combat and also in terms of morale, because a surrounded zone is weaker in morale terms. As you can see here, the Carthaginians had advanced their Gallic troops into the Syracusan right centre. The Syracusans had been forced to pull back because of the attritional nature of the combat, which meant that one more hit on that zone would have shattered some units and started to cause problems. So they pulled back to buy time, and in the hope that the centre, which was doing better, would be able to score enough hits to force the rout of the Carthaginians. So Timoleon himself in the centre here. On the 9th turn, it fell to him to stave off defeat, and he scored 3 shatters against the Carthaginian central zone there. Now, unfortunately for Timoleon, the Carthaginian morale held. They rolled 3 threes, which is the highest morale score you can get, and that prevented them from running away. But after he'd shattered 3 of them, the Carthaginians were down to 4 units shattered, and then over here, this zone started to get on the action. And after another 2 shatters, I think, they managed to force a morale check, which the Carthaginians failed. And so it was exactly this point that the Carthaginian army ran away. So it was a really interesting battle because of the tactical situation where you've got the terrain here, the river is obviously an obstacle. It's not a serious obstacle in lost battles, but because of the weather here, which was overcast, when it was raining, the river and stream zones were a bit of a liability because troops within them are at a minus when in combat. So that affected the way that the armies were deployed, and the fact that both armies were quite weak meant that they didn't have a lot of command points to play with, and so were not able to use the full width of the table that you would normally see. So the cavalry was probably the most interesting tactical aspect of the battle. They had a bit of luck getting through their opposite numbers here, but that was an interesting fight to see, and involved the use of the favour of the gods rule, which is where one side is allowed to call for a re-roll either of an attacking or defending dice, and then the favour of the gods then passes to the other side, who uses it when they are ready to do so as well. So when the favour of the gods was used was quite instrumental in the success of the Carthaginian flanking movement, and also in preventing the Syracusans from defeat, because the central zone there with Timoleon was hit with a double 6, which would have shattered 2 units, but would have spent 2 units and shattered one of them, but favour of the gods managed to avoid that happening. So historically, the battle was decided, according to Diodorus and Plutarch, or at least one of them, by the poor weather, which meant that hail came from this direction, which was into the face of the Carthaginians, and affected their ability to fight. And the Syracusans managed to overwhelm them in the end and wipe out the sacred band, sort of the elite cream of the Carthaginian army. So in terms of the battle, it worked out quite similar to the historical result as we know it. A hard-fought fight, which was eventually decided by a Greek push at the end. And looking at, you can't see it here, but the overall victory points were 67 points to Carthage and 109 to Syracuse. So it was quite a convincing victory in points terms for Timoleon, even though it was actually quite a close run thing in terms of damage inflicted on him. So the Carthaginians were in with a chance to win right up until, well, as you can see, the 9th turn, the penultimate turn, when Timoleon's attacks finally put the Carthaginians into strife. So, a really interesting battle, and I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about it. Thanks.